Have you ever wondered what happens to letters that are never opened? Those mailings that pile up in abandoned mailboxes, holding secrets that perhaps should never be revealed? I delivered mail to that farm for 12 years, but the last time I was there, I found something no mail carrier should ever see. My name is Mark Thompson, and for 23 years, I've traveled the dusty roads of the Nebraska plains as a rural mailman. I know every house, every family, every dog that barks when it sees me pass. I know when someone is expecting important news, when a bill is overdue, when a birthday is approaching. But of all the stops on my daily route, one has always been different from the others. Whitmore Farm, located at the end of the lonely County 47 highway, was a place where time seemed to have stood still decades ago. Old Mrs. Margaret Whitmore had lived alone on that property since her husband passed away more than 15 years ago. She was kind, reserved, and I was practically her only connection to the outside world. Each letter I delivered there seemed to carry an invisible weight, an importance I didn't fully understand. Until one day, everything changed. Letters began piling up in the mailbox. A week passed, then 2 weeks, then a whole month. I rang the doorbell several times, left notes, asked the neighbors nearby. Nobody lives there anymore, they told me with an indifferent shrug. But something inside me couldn't accept that. Mrs. Whitmore always told me she would die. In that house. She wasn't the type to give up. And then something impossible happened. One last letter arrived. The envelope was yellowed, the handwriting shaky but recognizable. When I read the sender's address, my heart almost stopped. Margaret Whitmore, County Road 47. The recipient? Margaret Whitmore, County Road 47. She had sent a letter to herself. Stay with me until the end, because what happened afterward completely changed my perspective on that lonely woman and on the secrets people carry throughout their lives. I knew I had to deliver that letter. Protocol demanded it. But what I didn't imagine was that, upon opening that rusty gate for the last time, I would discover a truth buried for over 40 years, a secret so profound that it would forever transform how I view every envelope that passes through my hands. That letter weighed heavily in my hands, as if it carried the weight of an entire life. And perhaps it did. Have you ever felt that? That moment when you realize you're about to discover something that will change everything, something that can no longer be ignored? If you've ever experienced this, leave a comment below about what has touched you most in this story so far. I know this kind of subject stirs something deep within us, and I want to know, do you know anyone who has kept secrets like this for years? Someone who has lived an entire life in silence, waiting for someone to simply notice? This channel exists precisely because of stories like this. Real. Stories that remind us of the invisible strength of humanity, of the love that persists even when everything seems lost. And it's your participation here that makes this project grow and reach more people who need to hear these narratives. So if you're feeling this connection now, if this story is making you reflect on your own life or on someone you know, leave a like below. This shows me that I'm on the right track and encourages me to continue bringing these stories to you. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that button now, because what comes next will surprise you even more. This story is just beginning, and you won't want to miss the ending. Turn on notifications too, because every week I bring you stories that touch the heart and remind us of what really matters. Now, returning to that cold October afternoon, with the impossible letter in my hands and the wind blowing through the abandoned fields of Whitmore Farm, I knew I had a choice to make. I could simply leave the letter in the overflowing mailbox and walk away, fulfilling my bureaucratic protocol. But something greater than fear, greater than reason, pushed me toward that rusty gate. Before I continue with what happened that afternoon that changed everything, I need you to understand what my routine was like, because it is precisely in the contrast between the normal and the extraordinary that the hidden truth gains its real impact. Every day, my alarm clock rings at 5 in the morning. It doesn't matter if it's a scorching summer or a freezing winter on the Nebraska plains. By 6 o'clock, I'm already at the distribution center, organizing piles and piles of mail. And it may seem like a mechanical, even repetitive job, But the truth is that each envelope that passes through my hands carries an invisible story. I'm not just a mailman. Over these 23 years, I've become a silent witness to people's lives. I see everything. The birthday cards that arrive punctually every year for little Emma on the Johnson farm. The overdue bills that pile up in the Morrisons' mailbox when the harvest wasn't good. The thin, elegant envelopes with news from distant relatives, bringing joy or grief. Every address on my route is a window into someone's journey, their decisions, their transformations, their invisible behind-the-scenes stories. Some people think solitary work is sad, but I've learned that there's a profound dignity in being part of these small human connections. I know Mr. Patterson, who eagerly awaits the gardening magazines every Monday. I know Widow Garcia, who receives handwritten letters from her daughter who lives in Chicago and always offers me homemade cookies. I know the young Thompson couple, who are awaiting the results of their adoption and check the mailbox 3 times a day. These people trust me without even realizing it, and this quiet responsibility shapes my mindset about what it truly means to serve. Whitmore Farm was always the last stop of my day, not by chance, but because it was literally at the end of County Highway 47, where the asphalt ends and the dirt begins. It was a faded white house with peeling paint in places, surrounded by cornfields that hadn't been cultivated for years. The constant wind made the old mill creak with a melancholy sound that seemed to tell stories of better times. But what marked that place most was the silence. A heavy silence, laden with memories and loneliness. Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, at 78 years old, was a woman of routine. Promptly at 4:30 in the afternoon she was there, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, waiting for my arrival. In the summer, there was always a glass of chilled lemonade waiting for me. In the winter, a hot, steaming cup of coffee. She never said much, but her gentle smile conveyed a gratitude that went beyond words. It was as if those brief minutes of my visit were the most important moment of her day. And perhaps they were. We talked about simple things, the weather, the city news, some light gossip about the neighbors. But there was something in her eyes, a depth I never quite managed to decipher. It was as if she carried an invisible weight, a revelation she never shared. Sometimes, when I handed her a letter, she would hold the envelope for a few seconds longer than necessary, as if gathering the courage to open it. Other times, she would simply put it away without looking, with an almost imperceptible sigh. I never asked. I've learned over the years that people reveal what they want to reveal at the right time. Forcing it doesn't work. True transformation happens when someone is ready to face what's hidden inside. And now, looking back, I realize that every detail of that routine had a meaning that I would only understand later. But going back to that fateful day in October, when everything changed, I held that impossible letter in my hands and knew that the next step I took would be irreversible. The rusty gate was there in front of me, creaking slightly in the wind. The silent house seemed to watch me, waiting, and for the first time in 23 years of my profession, I felt fear of what I might find on the other side. It was exactly 3 months ago that the first crack appeared in that seemingly endless routine. I arrived at Whitmore Farm at 4:30 in the afternoon, as usual, but something was different. The rocking chair on the porch was empty. No glass of lemonade waiting, no kind smile. Just the wind blowing through the abandoned fields and that windmill creaking with its ghostly sound. At first I thought perhaps she was just tired or had lost track of time. After all, at 78, it's understandable. I left the letters in the mailbox and drove away, but a strange feeling stayed with me all the way back. The next day, the same thing. Empty porch, curtains drawn, absolute silence. I rang the doorbell. I waited. Nothing. I knocked on the door with my knuckles. I called her name. The echo of my voice was lost in the emptiness of that place. It was then that I began to notice the details. The grass was growing more than usual. Dry leaves were piling up on the porch steps. The mailbox, which was always empty when I arrived because Mrs. Whitmore religiously removed everything, was now beginning to overflow. I left a note on the door, Something simple. "Mrs. Whitmore, is everything all right? If you need anything, let me know. Mark, the postman." I returned the next day. The note was still there, untouched, slightly damp from the evening drizzle. This wasn't normal. This wasn't the Mrs. Whitmore I knew. The woman who never left a letter unopened, who never missed our brief daily conversation. Something was profoundly wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. I made a decision that perhaps went beyond my responsibilities as a mail carrier. I drove to the nearest farm, about 3 kilometers away, where the Henderson couple lived. They were Mrs. Whitmore's closest neighbors, although close is a relative term when you live on the isolated plains of Nebraska. I asked if they knew anything, if they had seen Mrs. Whitmore recently. Mrs. Henderson looked at me with that expression of someone who doesn't want to get involved in other people's problems, and shrugged. "Ah, she must have gone to a nursing home," he said, with an indifference that shocked me. "You know how it is, Mark. Old people alone can't stay in those big houses forever. Someone from the family must have come to get her. Nobody lives there anymore." Mr. Henderson nodded, already turning his attention back to the tractor he was repairing. It was as if Mrs. Whitmore's existence was just an insignificant detail in the landscape, something that could disappear without a trace. But something inside me refused to accept that simplistic explanation. I knew that woman, not intimately perhaps, but well enough to know that she possessed a quiet determination, a willpower that transcended physical frailty. How many times had she told me, gazing at the surrounding fields with that distant look, "I'm going to die in this house, Mark. It's where I belong. It's where it all began, and it's where it will all end." These weren't empty words. It was a promise, an unwavering decision. She wasn't the type to give up, to simply pack her bags and leave without telling anyone. Her mindset deeply affected me, because in today's world, where everything is disposable and people change their minds as easily as they change their clothes, finding someone with such deep convictions was rare. And that's precisely why the situation didn't make sense. Where were the relatives who supposedly took her? Why didn't anyone notify the postman who had been delivering mail there for over a decade? Why did the house seem to have been abandoned overnight, as if life had simply stopped in the middle of an ordinary afternoon? Weeks turned into months. The mailbox overflowed more and more. Electricity bills, advertisements, a few personal letters that now had no one to open. I kept going every day, even knowing that no one would answer. It had become almost a ritual, a way to keep alive the hope that maybe, just maybe, one day I would get there and she would be on the porch again, smiling as if nothing had happened. But reality was relentless. That house was dead, and with it, it seemed that a piece of my own journey had also been extinguished. The silent impact of this absence was greater than I expected, because when you're part of someone's routine, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, you create an invisible connection, and when that connection breaks without explanation, without goodbye, without closure, it leaves a strange void that isn't easily filled. If you're feeling this story along with me, subscribe to the channel now. You're part of this narrative, and your presence here validates the importance of remembering that every life, every story, every absence matters. And then on a cold October morning, everything changed again. I was organizing the mail at the distribution center when my eyes fell upon a yellowed envelope that looked like it had come from another era. The envelope appeared on a grey Tuesday in October, buried among supermarket advertisements and phone bills. I was on autopilot, organizing the mail by route, when my fingers touched that unusual paper. It was a yellowish envelope, slightly wrinkled at the edges, as if it had passed through. Several hands before reaching me, the kind of paper you don't see anymore these days, that thicker, almost handcrafted material. I picked up the envelope and felt a shiver run down my spine even before reading what was written on it. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. I'd seen that handwriting hundreds of times over the years. It was hers. Sender, Margaret Whitmore, County Road 47. My heart raced when I read the recipient. Margaret Whitmore, County Road 47. I read it twice. 3 times. I made sure I wasn't seeing things I wasn't. She'd sent a letter to herself, a letter she herself was supposed to receive. But why? None of it made sense within the normal logic of the world. I turned the envelope over in my hands, searching for more clues. The postmark was there, dated 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. Exactly the period when her letters stopped arriving in the mailbox. Exactly when she disappeared without a trace. This couldn't be a coincidence. The revelation began to take shape in my mind like a growing shadow. She had mailed this letter shortly before disappearing, as if she knew something was about to happen, as if she were leaving a final message. I held the envelope up to the light, trying to see through it without damaging the mail. Nothing. Just the silhouette of a folded piece of paper inside. My professional training told me I should simply put that letter in the pile and deliver it like any other. After all, mail is sacred. No matter how strange the situation, the rules are clear. But something about that letter seemed too urgent to blindly follow protocol. It was as if it was silently screaming at me, begging to be delivered carefully, attentively, with the understanding that it wasn't just another piece of mail. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. How many decisions do we make in life that seem insignificant at the time, but carry a gigantic impact later? That was one of those moments. I could feel it. The letter weighed heavily in my hands, as if it contained not only paper and ink, but an entire life's journey condensed into words that had not yet been read. It was like a last breath, trapped in an envelope, waiting to be released. The other mail carriers passed by me in the distribution center, chatting about soccer, complaining about the cold that was starting to bite, laughing at some inside joke. Everything so normal, so everyday. But I was there, standing in the middle of that hubbub, holding a hidden truth that no one else noticed. The transformation that letter represented was invisible to everyone except me. And perhaps that was exactly why it had reached my hands. Perhaps it wasn't by chance. Perhaps it was destiny. I carefully tucked the letter into the inside pocket of my jacket, close to my heart. I felt its weight against my chest all morning as I completed the other deliveries. Each stop seemed like an eternity. Each polite conversation with the residents sounded distant, as if I were operating in two simultaneous realities. The visible reality, where I was just Mark, the reliable and punctual mailman, and the invisible reality, where I was the bearer of a secret that could change everything. When I finally finished all the other deliveries, I looked at the clock, 3:40 in the afternoon. In 20 minutes, I would be at Whitmore farm. I started the engine of my official car and drove silently along the familiar roads. My mindset had completely changed. It was no longer a routine delivery. It was a mission, a responsibility that went far beyond my job. It was about honoring the memory of someone who trusted me without me realizing the weight of that trust. The sky was heavy with dark clouds when I turned onto County Highway 47. The temperature had dropped drastically, and the wind was blowing with such force that the trees bent as if bowing to something greater. In the distance, I could already see the silhouette of Whitmore farm. The faded white house, the rusty mill, the empty fields, everything exactly as it had been 3 months ago. But this time I wasn't just going to leave the letter in the overflowing mailbox. This time I was going further. I parked in front of the gate. The rusty metal creaked in the wind, emitting that high-pitched sound that always gave me the creeps. I took the letter from my pocket and held it with both hands for a moment. I took a deep breath. And then I pushed the gate open. The gate gave way with a metallic groan that seemed to echo for eternity across the empty fields. The sound was sharp, painful, as if the metal itself were protesting against my intrusion. I took my first step toward the house and immediately felt the difference. The grass was tall, reaching almost to my knees in places. It wasn't just overgrown, it was wild, reclaiming the stone path that had once been so well kept. The transformation of that place in just 3 months was frightening. It was as if nature was reclaiming the territory that humans had abandoned. Each step seemed heavier than the last, not because of the grass or the uneven terrain, but because of the psychological weight of that moment. I was crossing an invisible line, entering a space that didn't belong to me, driven only by the conviction that this letter needed to reach its final destination. The wind blew strongly, making the old windmill creak in an irregular and disturbing rhythm. The sound was like a lament, as if the entire property were mourning the absence of its owner. I climbed the 3 steps to the porch. The wood creaked under my weight, and for a brief moment I feared it might give way. Everything there was deteriorating at an unnatural speed. The windows that once gleamed clean in the afternoon sun were now covered by dusty curtains that blocked any view of the interior. It was like looking into the closed eyes of someone who is no longer present. The house had lost its soul. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my heart, which was pounding too hard against my ribs. I rang the doorbell. The sound echoed inside the house, but no answer came. I waited. I counted to 30 in silence. Nothing. Just the wind outside and that damned windmill creaking incessantly. I knocked on the door with my knuckles, harder this time, 3 firm knocks that reverberated through the wood. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's Mark, the postman." My voice sounded strange, too small against the silent vastness of that place. "I brought a letter." "For you?" "An important letter." Silence again. But it wasn't an ordinary silence. It was that heavy, dense kind of silence that seems to press on your eardrums from the inside out. The kind of silence that exists in places where life no longer dwells. I knew I shouldn't do what I was about to do. All my professional training, all the ethics of my work, everything screamed for me to simply leave my letter in the mailbox and walk away. But something bigger than fear, bigger than the rules, propelled me forward. I gripped the doorknob. The metal was cold against my palm. For a second I hesitated. This was the last conscious decision I could make before completely crossing the line between professional duty and trespassing. But the letter in my pocket seemed to burn against my chest, reminding me that there was a hidden truth inside that needed to be revealed. I turned the doorknob slowly. It yielded without resistance. The door was unlocked. My stomach clenched. Unlocked doors on. Isolated rural properties usually mean 2 things. Either the person left in a hurry, or they never had a chance to lock them. I pushed the door open slowly, inch by inch, while calling out again, "Mrs. Whitmore, it's Mark. I'm coming in. Is everything all right? I just came to bring your mail." My voice trembled slightly, betraying the nervousness I was trying to hide. The door swung open, revealing the house's gloomy interior. The first thing that struck me was the smell. It wasn't of decay, thank God, but of stagnant air, of accumulated dust, of frozen time. It was the smell of a place that had been abandoned suddenly, without ceremony, without farewell. The dim light filtering through the dusty curtains cast strange shadows on the walls. I took a step inside, my eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. "Mrs. Whitmore?" I called again, but I already knew there would be no answer. The visual impact of what I saw left me paralyzed for a few seconds. The house was untouched, but abandoned. It was as if someone had simply disappeared in the middle of an ordinary day, leaving everything exactly as it was. In the living room, I saw her favorite armchair, with a shawl still hanging from the back. On the side table, reading glasses lay beside an open book. Bookmark on page 63. She never finished that story. I walked slowly down the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the sepulchral silence. Every detail I observed heightened the feeling that something was profoundly wrong here. It wasn't just a person who had gone to a nursing home. It was a life that had been abruptly interrupted, frozen in time, waiting for something or someone who never returned. The journey that had brought me there was only beginning, and I could feel in my bones that the revelations to come would completely change my understanding of who Mrs. Margaret Whitmore was. If you've made it this far with me, entering this silent house and feeling the weight of each discovery, subscribe to the channel now. You are an essential part of this story, and your presence validates the importance of not letting these narratives be lost to oblivion. I kept walking, heading towards her room, where I knew I would find something no mailman should ever see. My eyes slowly wandered across the walls of the room. Framed family photos, some in black and white, others faded with time. Young Mrs. Whitmore, smiling beside a tall man in a hat, presumably her deceased husband. Wedding photos, photos in fields of green, thriving corn. Each image was a window into a life that had once been full, brimming with promise and dreams. But now, everything was covered by a thin layer of dust that danced in the dim light filtering through the curtains. It was like walking through a time capsule where each object held a frozen memory. I went into the kitchen. The visual impact made me stop at the door. On the worn wooden table, there was still a cup of coffee, half full. The surface of the liquid was covered in greenish mold, forming a disturbing circular pattern. She had drunk half of that cup and simply stopped, simply left, or been taken away. The calendar hanging on the wall was stuck in August, the page showing a cute kitten that contrasted grotesquely with the heavy atmosphere of the room. 3 months trapped in time, 3 months of absolute silence. Every object I saw reinforced the same narrative, impossible to ignore. Life here had been interrupted in the middle of an absolutely ordinary day. There were no signs of struggle, of desperate haste, of violence. It was as if she had simply dissolved into thin air while living her routine. The pots and pans were washed and organized. The floor was swept. Even the dish towel was neatly folded on the back of the chair. It was this normality that made everything even more disturbing. The hidden truth here didn't shout. It whispered through the silent details. My heart pounded as I walked down the narrow hallway toward the bedrooms. 3 doors, 2 locked, 1 ajar. Logic told me to leave, call the authorities, let qualified people investigate. But something stronger than logic, an almost magnetic force, pulled me forward. This journey had begun with a simple letter, but now it had transformed into something much bigger. A search for answers I may not even have known I was looking for. I approached the half-open door. It was her room. I pushed the door slowly, and it opened silently. The room was meticulously tidy. The bed was made, the blanket stretched without a single wrinkle. Clothes were neatly folded on the chair by the window. Slippers were perfectly aligned beside the bed. Everything was so organized it seemed artificial, like a set built for a play that would never be staged. But it was when my eyes landed on the bedside table that my world silently collapsed. There was a pile of letters, not just a few. Dozens of them, perhaps 50 or 60 envelopes carefully stacked, each addressed in that trembling handwriting I knew so well. I approached slowly, as if approaching something sacred and forbidden at the same time. I picked up the top envelope. Recipient, Margaret Whitmore. Sender, Margaret Whitmore. Postmark date, 2018. I picked up another envelope from further down the pile, 2003, then another, 1992. I kept digging through that impossible pile, 1985. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. She had been writing letters to herself for decades, not just a few sentimental or nostalgic letters. Decades of correspondence with herself, a solitary conversation through time that no one else knew existed. The revelations began to fall into place like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle I didn't even know I was putting together. Why would someone do this? What kind of pain, what kind of secret, what kind of desperate need drives a person to write to themselves for 40 years? It wasn't a casual habit. It was a ritual, a necessity, a way to keep something alive that might otherwise be forgotten. The transformation of my understanding of who Mrs. Whitmore was happening in real time, layer by layer being peeled away. I sat on the edge of her bed, holding those old letters reverently. My hands trembled slightly. I knew I shouldn't open mail that wasn't mine, but at the same time I felt she had left it all there precisely to be found, as if she had set up this scene knowing that one day someone, perhaps me, would enter that house and discover the secrets of a life lived in hiding. I took the letter I had brought with me from my pocket, the last letter, the one she had sent to herself 6 weeks ago. I held it alongside the others, seeing how perfectly it fit into that decades-long narrative. This wasn't just the last delivery. It was the final chapter of a story that had begun long before I became her postman. And now, I was at the center of this revelation, holding in my hands the weight of a decision that would change everything. With trembling hands, I began to open the letter I had brought with me. The envelope gave way easily, as if it had been waiting for this moment. I carefully slid my finger under the flap of the envelope, as if opening something sacred. The paper yielded easily, revealing a single sheet folded in 3. I slowly unfolded it, and Mrs. Whitmore's trembling handwriting stared at me like a final whisper from beyond the silence. I read the words once. Then I read them again, because my brain refused to fully process what was written there. Dear Margaret from the future, if you are reading this, it is because I am ready to remember. Go to the barn, under the 3rd board to the left of the door. There lies the truth I promised never to forget and never to reveal. I felt a chill run down my spine, vertebra by vertebra, until it settled at the base of my spine. This was no ordinary letter. It was a map, a final instruction, an emotional testament left not for the world, but for herself, or for whomever she met. First, her decision to reveal something after decades of silence carried a weight I could physically feel. My hands trembled as I held the thin paper, aware that I was holding the key to a hidden truth someone had kept for a lifetime. I got out of bed and walked to the bedroom window. I gently pushed aside the dusty curtain and looked out. There it was, the old barn, its roof partially collapsed, its wooden structure worn down by time and the elements. It was about 50 meters from the house, surrounded by tall grass and some rusty farm tools abandoned over the years. It seemed dangerous. It seemed forbidden. It seemed exactly the kind of place where deep secrets are buried, never to be found again. My rational mind started screaming. I should call the authorities. This had gone too far. I had entered private property, rummaged through personal belongings, opened mail that technically wasn't mine. Every step I had taken up to that point was questionable from a legal and ethical standpoint. And now this letter was asking me to dig even deeper, to unearth something that had been intentionally hidden. The sensible journey would end here. A sensible man would pick up the phone, call the local police, explain the situation, and let professionals handle it. But something bigger than fear, bigger than common sense, bigger than all the rules I knew, pushed me forward. It was an inexplicable conviction that I was there for a reason, that this letter had reached my hands not by chance but for a purpose, that Mrs. Whitmore had somehow orchestrated all of this so that someone, perhaps specifically me, would discover what she had kept for decades. She wanted someone to know, and that someone, through circumstances I didn't yet fully understand, was me. I looked again at the letter in my hand, the shaky handwriting, the carefully chosen words. The truth I promised never to forget and never to reveal. That sentence carried layers of meaning that I could barely begin to unravel. What makes someone promise never to forget something? Precious memories, deep trauma. And what makes that same person promise never to reveal it? Shame, protection, fear of the consequences. The transformation of my understanding of her life was happening in waves, each revelation bringing more questions than answers. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in my pocket, next to my heart. I felt its weight against my chest, as if it were a physical responsibility. I took a deep breath. I looked around the room one last time. The perfectly made bed, the folded clothes, the dozens of letters on the bedside table. All of that was part of a ritual she had maintained for 40 years. A ritual of remembering. A ritual of not letting something crucial be erased by time. I left the room and walked back down the hall, through the living room with the family photos, past the kitchen with the moldy coffee cup. Each step toward the back door felt heavier, but also more inevitable. There was no turning back. I had crossed the threshold between curiosity and commitment, between professional duty and personal mission. The impact of this decision wasn't yet entirely clear to me, but I knew, deep down, that what I was about to discover would change not only my understanding of Mrs. Whitmore, but possibly my understanding of the nature of love, loss, and human memory. I opened the back door. The cold wind hit my face like a final warning. The barn was there in front of me, its silhouette outlined against the cloudy October sky. The tall grass swayed in the wind, creating green waves that seemed to invite or warn me to move on. The windmill continued its ghostly creaking sound, which now seemed like an appropriate soundtrack for the moment. If you're feeling that same chill down your spine with me, if each step of this discovery is drawing you deeper into the story, subscribe to the channel now. You're witnessing this journey just as much as I was. Your presence validates the importance of honoring the secrets that ordinary people keep in their extraordinary lives. I started walking towards the barn, the tall grass brushing against my legs, my heart pounding in a rhythm that mixed fear and determination. The third plank to the left of the door. Those words echoed in my mind as I drew ever closer to the final revelation. I crossed the field toward the barn, as if walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The tall grass whipped my legs with every step, and the cold wind seemed to want to push me back. But I kept going. 50 meters never seemed so long. When I finally reached the barn entrance, I stopped for a moment, looking at that structure that had seen better days. The wooden planks were worn, some loose, others missing altogether. The roof had a considerable hole on the right side, letting the rain and time do their destructive work. I pushed open the double doors. They creaked in sharp protest, resisting for a moment before giving way. The dim afternoon light filtered through the gaps between the boards and the hole in the roof, creating rays of dusty light that cut through the dimness. The smell hit me immediately. Old wood, old and decaying hay, damp earth. It was the smell of abandonment, of a place that had long been without purpose. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and I could see the old tools hanging on the walls, some bales of hay covered in mold, an old wheelless cart leaning against the corner. I took a deep breath and began counting the floorboards of the doorway. First board, second board, third board from the left. There it was. It didn't look any different from the others, but when I knelt down and ran my fingers over it, I realized it was loose. Not completely loose enough to accidentally lift, but loose enough that someone who knew where to look could remove it. With effort, I wedged my fingers into the edges and pulled. The wood resisted for a moment, held together by time and moisture, but then gave way with a dry creak. Below the plank there was a small space excavated in the earth, and inside that space, partially wrapped in a piece of waxed canvas, was a rusty metal box. My heart raced. It had been there for decades, hidden, protected, waiting. I picked up the box carefully, as if it were a precious archaeological artifact. It was heavy, not because of the metal, but because of what it represented. The hidden truth that Mrs. Whitmore had guarded her entire life was literally in my hands. I sat on the dusty barn floor and placed the box in my lap. The lid was stuck shut with rust, but with a little force I managed to open it. The sound of the creaking metal echoed through the empty barn. And then I looked inside. Black and white photos, their edges yellowed with age. Old certificates, the paper so fragile it seemed they would crumble at the touch. Yellowed letters, carefully folded. And at the bottom, wrapped in a delicate fabric, a small pair of baby shoes, tiny, white but stained by time. I picked up one of the photos with trembling hands. It was Mrs. Whitmore, but incredibly young. Maybe 20 years old, maybe less. She was sitting in a wooden chair, and in her arms she held a baby wrapped in a white blanket. Her face showed something I had never seen in the photos of the house, a mixture of absolute love and profound sadness. It was as if she were trying to memorize every detail of that moment, knowing it would be all she would have. Picked up another photo, the same scene, a different angle, and then I realized something that made my stomach clench. In all the family photos I had seen in the house, on the living room walls, there was never a child. Never. I picked up one of the letters from the box. The paper was so old I was afraid to tear it. I opened it with extreme care and began to read. The words were written in the same handwriting I knew, but firmer, younger. 1967. I was 19 years old, single, pregnant. My family sent me away, said I was a disgrace. I had my son alone in this barn on a cold March night. He was born perfect, 10 fingers, 10 little toes. He cried loudly and strongly, but back then, in a small town like this, A single mother had no rights. They took my baby away 2 days later. They said he would have a better life, a real family. I never knew him beyond those 48 hours. I never knew the name they gave him. For 40 years I wrote letters to myself, so I would never forget that. He existed. Tears began to stream down my face before I could control them. They weren't just tears of sadness, but of profound understanding. Everything made sense now. The decades of letters to herself, the self-imposed isolation, the silent house. She had created a ritual of remembrance because it was the only way to keep alive the son who had been taken from her. Each letter was an affirmation against forgetting, against the narrative that society had imposed on her. The transformation of my vision of that lonely woman was complete. She was not just an elderly lady living in isolation. She was a mother who never stopped loving, never stopped remembering, never gave up on honoring her son's existence. I held the tiny shoes in my hands and looked around the barn with new eyes. This was where it had all begun, and where, in a way, it had all ended too. I sat in that barn for I don't know how long, holding those tiny shoes, reading and rereading the old letters. But eventually, practical reality caught up with me. I needed to know what had happened to Mrs. Whitmore. I needed to understand where she was, if she was still alive, if there was any way to connect that past pain with the present. I picked up my cell phone with still trembling hands and called the local police station. I explained the situation as objectively as I could, initially omitting the more intimate details I had discovered. The police arrived in less than 20 minutes. 2 officers who knew the property, who knew Mrs. Whitmore by sight. After a few calls and checks in their systems, the older officer, a man named Sheriff Johnson, looked at me with an expression of genuine sadness. "Mr. Thompson, I regret to inform you that Mrs. Margaret Whitmore passed away 3 months ago at the municipal hospital. Heart attack. It was quick, peaceful according to the doctors. There were no known relatives to notify, no will registered. The property is scheduled to be auctioned off by the county next month to cover outstanding debts." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was dead. She had died alone in a hospital, with no one by her side, no one to hold her hand. And worst of all, without anyone knowing the truth, she had kept hidden her whole life. But then I looked at the metal box in my hands and made a decision that would change everything. The story couldn't end like this. That son taken from her needed to know. He needed to know that he was loved, that he was remembered, that he existed not only in the cold adoption records, but in the broken heart of a mother who never forgot him. In the following days, I used every resource I could find. I hired a private investigator with my savings. I gave him all the information I found in the box, dates, partial names, the name of the hospital where the baby was born. The search was intense, but eventually we received the connection that would change everything. The researcher had found him. Thomas Whitmore Carson, 57, history. Professor in Iowa City, Iowa. Adopted in March 1967 by a loving family who gave him the surname Carson, but kept Whitmore as part of his identity. My hands trembled as I dialed the number the investigator gave me. The phone rang 3 times before a polite, slightly curious male voice answered. "Hello?" I took a deep breath. "Mr. Thomas Whitmore Carson, my name is Mark Thompson. I was the mailman for your biological mother, Margaret Whitmore, and I have something very important to tell you." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. I always knew I was adopted. My adoptive parents never hid that from me. But never, in almost 60 years, have I been able to get any information about her, about who she was, why she gave me up for adoption if she thought about me. I told the whole story, every detail, the barn, the letters, the little shoes, the decades of preserved memory. When I finished, I heard sobs on the other end of the line. Thomas wept openly, unashamedly, processing decades of unanswered questions that were finally finding their answers. "She loved me," he said through tears. "She truly loved me. I wasn't abandoned. I was taken from her." The transformation in his voice was palpable, from doubt to certainty, from emptiness to fullness. 2 weeks later, Thomas was on the porch of Whitmore farm. Seeing him there, the same height as the man in the old photographs, with facial features that echoed those of young Mrs. Whitmore, was like watching time fold back on itself. He spent hours in her room reading each of those letters, dozens of them, some short, just reminders to herself, others long, detailing memories of the 48 hours they had spent together. He held the little shoes to his chest and cried like a lost boy who had finally found his way home. The impact of that discovery on Thomas was profound. He decided, right then and there, that he wouldn't let the farm be auctioned off. He used his savings, took out loans, and overcame bureaucratic hurdles to acquire the property. "I'm going to restore it," he told me, with determination in his eyes. "I'm going to make it a home again. It's where she lived. It's where I was born. It's where our story, however brief, began." And that's exactly what he did. In the following months, the farm underwent an impressive transformation. The paint was renewed, the garden was replanted, the mill was repaired, and on the porch, where Mrs. Whitmore used to wait for me with lemonade in the summer, Thomas installed a beautifully crafted wooden plaque. The words engraved on it still bring tears to my eyes. Margaret Whitmore lived here. She was a mother. She was remembered. She was loved. If you're feeling the weight of this journey, if this story has touched something deep within you, subscribe to the channel now, because you are part of this narrative of redemption and memory. Your presence here ensures that stories like this are not lost to oblivion. But the story still had one last chapter to be written, one that would change not only the farm, but also my own life. I still work as a mail carrier. I still wake up at 5 in the morning, still organize endless piles of mail at the distribution center, still travel the same dusty roads of the Nebraska plains. But something fundamental has changed within me. Now each letter that passes through my hands carries a different weight. It's no longer just paper and ink, addresses and stamps. It's the possibility of an untold story. It's the chance that behind that door there's someone guarding a hidden truth the world never knew. It's the constant reminder that each address represents a complete life, with its invisible pains, its secret loves, its memories preserved against all odds. The transformation in my mindset was profound and irreversible. Before, I saw my work as functional, almost mechanical. Pick up letters here, deliver them there, repeat tomorrow. But the journey with Mrs. Whitmore taught me that being a postman is being a witness. It's being, sometimes unknowingly, the last connection between someone and the outside world. It's carrying not just mail, but fragments of human lives that trust you to complete their stories. Now, when I deliver a letter to the widow Garcia, I wonder what secret she keeps. When I leave mail in Mr. Patterson's mailbox, I question what memories he silently preserves. And Whitmore Farm, which used to be just the last stop on my day, is now a sanctuary. Thomas lives there now. He's completely transformed the place. Last summer, he planted sunflowers all around the property. He said they were his mother's favorite flowers, according to one of the letters he found. Whenever I stop by to deliver his mail, he invites me in. We have coffee together in the same kitchen where I once found that moldy cup. We talk about life, about memory, about the impact of decisions made decades ago that still reverberate in the present. Thomas told me he's been working on a special project. He's compiling all the letters his mother wrote to herself over 40 years into a book. Not for commercial publication, but as a family record. An emotional legacy he can leave to his own children. "She never had the chance to raise me," he once told me, with tears in his eyes but a smile on his face. But through these letters, I'm getting to know who she was. Her strength, her determination, her unbreakable love. She teaches me even after death. Mrs. Whitmore's silent persistence in never forgetting, in religiously writing those letters to herself decade after decade, gave her son something precious he had sought his whole life, without knowing where to find it. The absolute certainty that he was wanted, deeply loved, remembered every day. He wasn't abandoned for lack of love, but separated against her will by a society that didn't allow single mothers to have choices. This revelation transformed the narrative Thomas carried about his own origins. It changed how he sees himself, how he understands his place in the world. And I learned something equally valuable on this journey. Sometimes, the deepest stories aren't in newspaper headlines, they aren't in history books, they aren't on social media. They're hidden in the quietest places, in an abandoned barn, in a rusty box under a loose board, in letters that no one but the author herself would read. These stories patiently wait for someone to find them, for someone to care enough to look beyond the surface, for someone to decide that the truth deserves to be known, even decades later. Every time I pass by the farm now and see that plaque on the porch, Margaret Whitmore lived here. She was a mother. She was remembered. She was loved. I feel a profound gratitude for having been chosen to be a part of that story. I don't know if it was destiny, coincidence, or simply being in the right place at the right time, but I know it. Fundamentally changed who I am. It made me more attentive, more compassionate, more aware that every person I meet carries entire universes within them that I will never see unless I pay attention. And that's exactly why I decided to tell you this story. Because I believe that somewhere, perhaps very close to you, there is someone keeping a secret like this, someone who loved in silence, who suffered without complaining, who preserved memories that the world tried to erase. And perhaps by hearing this story, you will become more attentive to the people around you, to elderly neighbors, to distant relatives, to ordinary people who live extraordinary lives behind the scenes of everyday invisibility. And now, let me tell you what happened a few weeks ago, something that brought a final closure to this story in a way I could never have imagined. A few weeks ago, Thomas called me and asked me to come to the farm on a Saturday afternoon. He said he had something to show me. When I arrived, I found the garden completely transformed. He had planted a white rose bush right next to the porch, exactly where Mrs. Whitmore used to sit. White roses were her favorites, he explained, showing me an old letter where she mentioned it. I wanted her to have this here, even if only symbolically. We stayed there talking for hours until the sun began to set over the fields. And at that moment, looking at the restored farmhouse, at the life that had returned to that place, at the plaque honoring a woman the world had almost forgotten, I fully understood the purpose of it all. Mrs. Whitmore didn't need a grand monument. She just needed someone to know, someone to care, that her story wouldn't die with her. And that's what happened. Through an impossible letter, a postman who decided to go above and beyond the call of duty, a son who finally found the answers he'd been searching for his whole life, her memory lives on. Not just alive, celebrated, honored, preserved. If you've made it this far with me, if you felt every moment of this journey, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end." I want to know that this story touched you as much as living it touched me. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. Every week I bring you real stories like this that remind us of what really matters in life. Leave a like too, because it shows me that this type of content makes sense to you. And look, there's a video over here that I think will perfectly complement what you just heard. Click and stay with me there, because there are more stories waiting for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about the stories of ordinary people living extraordinary lives. See you in the next video.